The palace of Velcora was made of glass and gold, a shining crown floating above the clouds of the capital world. Its towers touched the stars, and from its highest balcony the Empress Lyra could see the whole empire she ruled, an empire built on pride, power, and unbroken voices. Every alien noble spoke loudly, their words filled with command and pride. Their voices echoed through the marble halls, always trying to prove who was stronger, who was wiser, who deserved to stand closer to the Empress's throne. But on that day, when Lyra stood before the royal court, silence ruled the hall. The Reason stood beside her, tall, calm, and human. His name was Ethan Cole. He wore no crown, no armor of shining light, no cloak of power. Only a simple black suit with a faint mark on the shoulder, the insignia of an old human regiment that no longer existed. His eyes were steady, the color of storm clouds before rain. He bowed to no one, not even to the Empress herself. The alien nobles looked at him with confusion and disgust. "A human?" one whispered, their voice sharp. "A creature of war and ruin?" Another sneered. "He doesn't even speak." "Is he mute, Empress?" Lyra ignored them. She stood straight, her golden eyes fixed forward. "This man," she said clearly, "is my husband." The room erupted in gasps. Some nobles shouted in disbelief. Others laughed bitterly. The High Advisor stepped forward, scales glinting under the chandeliers. "Your Majesty," he said, "forgive me, but this is not our way. You cannot bind yourself to one of them. The humans are—" "Enough," Lyra interrupted softly, but her voice carried across the hall. "You speak as though I do not know his kind. I have seen the wars. I have seen what humans can do, and I have seen what they can love." Her words silenced even the boldest, but their eyes still burned with judgment. They saw Ethan not as a husband, but as a tool, a strange relic of a violent race. Humans had fought in the great galactic wars long ago, and though they had survived, their name carried more fear than honor. To marry one, and especially for an empress, was beyond reason. Ethan stood quietly through it all. He did not defend himself, did not speak, did not even shift his gaze. He stood behind Lyra like a silent mountain, steady and unmoving, his expression unreadable. Only once, when her hand brushed his, did his eyes soften. For a brief moment, his silence felt like peace. Later that evening, when the halls were empty and the stars burned quietly beyond the windows, Lyra turned to him in their private chamber. She studied his face, so calm yet carrying something deep beneath the surface. "They hate you," she said softly. "They don't understand why I chose you." Ethan looked at her, his voice low and quiet like wind through dry grass. "They don't need to understand," he said. "You do." Lyra tilted her head, searching his eyes. "Do you ever feel out of place here?" He smiled faintly, the first smile she had seen from him all day. "Everywhere is out of place," he murmured. "Except beside you." The words were simple, but they struck her heart like an arrow. For all the words her court spoke, polished speeches, poetic lies, this human's few words carried more truth. In the days that followed, Ethan became known in the palace as the Silent Guard. He rarely spoke, rarely smiled. But wherever Lyra went, he followed. At diplomatic banquets, he stood behind her chair, watching every movement with quiet care. When she walked through the gardens, he matched her pace, silent as her shadow. Some of her servants whispered that he was dangerous. "Humans kill without warning," they said. "He hides his violence behind those calm eyes." Others pitied him. "He doesn't belong here," they murmured. "The Empress has chained a wolf in a golden cage." Lyra heard their words but ignored them. She had seen the truth in him, a stillness that hid pain, not pride. Sometimes at night, she would wake to find him sitting by the window watching the distant stars. His hand would rest near the old mark on his shoulder as if touching a ghost. One night she asked, "Do you miss your world?" He didn't turn to her. "Earth?" he said quietly. "It's gone. The part I loved, at least." She stepped closer. "What happened there?" He hesitated. "We fought. We survived. But survival isn't peace, Lyra." His words carried a sorrow she could feel but not understand. She reached out and touched his arm gently. "You don't have to fight anymore," she said. "Not here." He looked at her then, eyes soft but distant. "That's what I tell myself," he whispered. "Every day." She didn't press him further. She didn't need to. The silence between them said more than words ever could. But even in that peace, something stirred in the shadows. Beyond the palace walls, among the jealous nobles and forgotten generals, whispers of rebellion grew louder. They called Lyra's love for a human a disgrace and insult to their bloodline, and yet Lyra didn't care. Each morning she stood beside Ethan before the great mirrors, taking his hand as they faced the day. Each time their fingers touched, she felt safer, not because he was strong, but because he was steady. She didn't know what haunted him, or what he had promised himself long ago. She didn't know what the quiet really meant. All she knew was that she had fallen in love with a man who said little, smiled rarely, and carried storms behind his calm eyes. And somewhere deep inside that silence, something waited, patient, dangerous, and powerful. A truth she would only discover when the stars themselves turned red, and the man she thought was gentle would finally draw his blade. The palace of Velcora was never silent for long. Its halls were filled with voices, laughter, and the sound of politics. But whenever Ethan Cole entered, the noise always faded. He didn't command silence. It simply followed him like a shadow. There was something in his presence, calm, heavy, unreadable, that made others lower their voices. He never wore royal clothes or armor made of gold. Just a plain black coat, the same kind he had worn on the day Lyra met him. The nobles said it was improper for a royal consort to dress so simply, but Lyra never cared. She said he looked most himself that way, honest, unpretending, and strong. Every morning he stood beside her throne, never speaking unless asked. When foreign envoys arrived, they looked at him with curiosity or fear. The stories of humans had spread far across the stars, and a race born in chaos, forged in pain. Some called them demons of the old wars. Others called them survivors. To Lyra, Ethan was both. A quiet storm who had chosen peace over power. But peace is fragile, especially among the proud. One evening, a grand council was held. Nobles, governors, and commanders filled the circular hall beneath the glass ceiling, where two suns glowed faintly above the misted clouds. Lyra sat upon her throne, her golden robes shimmering, her crown like a halo. Ethan stood behind her, silent and watchful, his eyes sharp but calm. The meeting began with reports, trade routes, border patrols, and the small rebellions stirring in the outer systems. But soon the talk turned toward Ethan. It always did. A tall ambassador from the Drakari Confederation stood, his scaled face twisted with arrogance. "Your Majesty," he began with a bow that was only half sincere, "it is not my place to question your personal choices. But the presence of a human at your throne troubles many of your allies." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "Troubles? Or threatens?" The Drakari smiled thinly. "Humans are unpredictable. Violent by nature. A human warrior at your side might make others doubt your intentions." The hall stirred with murmurs. Lyra's advisors shifted uncomfortably. Some agreed but dared not speak it aloud. Others avoided looking at Ethan entirely. Ethan stood still. He did not move. He did not speak. His eyes stared forward, fixed on nothing. Lyra leaned forward, her voice steady but sharp. "You doubt my intentions or his?" The Drakari chuckled, showing small fangs. "Both, perhaps. It is said humans fight even among themselves. Tell me, Empress, how long before your human grows tired of silence and reminds us what his kind truly is?" The insult hung in the air like poison. Lyra's hand clenched around the armrest of her throne. But before she could speak, a voice filled the hall. Deep, quiet, and calm. "Ethan." He stepped forward once, his eyes locked on the Drakari. "You speak as if you know humans," he said softly. "But you don't," the ambassador smirked. "And what are humans, then? Beasts who burn their own world?" Ethan tilted his head slightly. "No," he said. "We're the ones who survive it." The words fell like a blade striking stone. The entire hall went still. The ambassador's smirk faded. For the first time, many in the room saw something flicker in the human's eyes. Not anger, but memory. A shadow of something far deeper than hate. Lyra stood slowly. "Enough," she said firmly, her voice echoing off the walls. "This council is about peace, not prejudice. The next one who questions my husband's worth will answer directly to me." She turned, her golden gaze softening as she looked at Ethan. "And you, my love," she said gently, "do not waste your breath on those who cannot see." Ethan nodded once, stepping back to his place behind her. But his mind wasn't calm. He had spent years trying to bury his past. The war, the screams, the smell of burning air. He had promised himself never to draw his weapon again, never to let that part of him surface. Yet every insult, every reminder of what humans once were, pulled at the edges of his control. Later that night, as the suns dipped below the horizon, Lyra found him on the balcony again. He stood alone, hands resting on the cold railing, his eyes lost in the stars. The air was thin up there, almost whispering. "You heard them," she said quietly, coming to stand beside him. "I did," he replied. "You let them speak that way about you." He nodded slightly. "Words don't cut as deep as war does." Lyra turned to him, her eyes full of both love and frustration. "But you can't just stay silent forever. Ethan, they mistake your quiet for weakness." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something fragile behind the calm. A small tremor in the walls he built around himself. "I'm not silent because I'm weak," he said softly. "I'm silent because I remember what happens when I'm not." His words sent a chill through her. She stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm. "What did you promise yourself?" she asked. Ethan's jaw tightened. "That I'd never draw my blade again." Lyra stared at him, searching his face. "Why?" He hesitated for a long moment. The stars reflected in his eyes like fading embers. "Because the last time I did," he said slowly, "I didn't stop. Not until there was nothing left standing." The pain in his voice was quiet, but it pierced deeper than any scream. She wanted to comfort him, but she didn't know how. So she simply rested her hand over his heart. "Then let this place be your peace," she whispered. "Let me be it." He nodded faintly. "That's what I'm trying to do." For a moment, silence settled between them again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was gentle, filled with the kind of understanding that doesn't need words. Far below them, the lights of the capital shimmered like fireflies. The empire slept, unaware that its empress and her human husband stood side by side, two souls bound by love and haunted by history. But beyond the palace walls, the night wasn't quiet. In the shadows, a messenger knelt before a hooded figure, whispering of rebellion and blood. "The Empress grows weak," the figure said. "Her human has softened her heart. It is time to remind the stars who truly rules." And as the city lights dimmed, Ethan's words echoed softly in his mind, words he had meant as a warning to himself. "I promised I'd never draw my blade again." He didn't yet know that soon. That promise would break, not for war, not for anger, but for love. The weeks that followed the council meeting were quiet but not peaceful. The palace glittered under sunlight the same as before, yet beneath its beauty, tension moved like smoke. Every servant felt it, every guard sensed it. Something unseen was brewing, something dangerous. Lyra tried to pretend all was well. She smiled during ceremonies, listened to reports, and gave speeches about unity and progress. But when the hall emptied and the doors closed, she sat in silence beside Ethan, her fingers brushing his hand without a word. He didn't ask what troubled her. He already knew. Whispers had reached the throne, whispers of rebellion. Old nobles, those who had once ruled with cruelty before Lyra's reforms, now plotted in the shadows. They said the Empress had fallen under a human spell, that her judgment was clouded by love for an alien creature. Some called her unfit to rule, others called her cursed. Lyra didn't fear their words, but she feared what they might do. One evening, as dusk spread across the palace sky, she stood on her balcony, staring out into the violet mist of Velcora's atmosphere. The city lights below glowed like rivers of gold. Ethan stood behind her, silent as always, but she could feel his presence, calm and solid like a shield. "They're gathering strength," she said quietly. "I can feel it." He didn't answer right away. His eyes followed the horizon, watching the movement of ships in the far distance. "You've always had enemies," he said finally. "But this feels different," she turned to him. "You can sense it too." He nodded slightly. "There's a rhythm to danger," he said. "A silence before something breaks." Lyra's heart tightened. "You speak like a soldier again." He gave a faint smile. "Maybe it never leaves you. Maybe it just sleeps until it's needed." For a moment they stood together in the fading light, two souls from different worlds bound by a love neither fully understood. But the quiet didn't last. That night, while the Empress rested, an emergency alarm echoed through the palace halls. The deep, throbbing sound jolted Ethan awake. He was out of bed before the second pulse. His instincts and the ones he tried to bury became alive. Lyra sat up, alarmed. "What's happening?" He was already moving, grabbing his coat and checking the door. "Stay here," he said sharply. "Ethan," he looked back, eyes hard but gentle. "Please." And then he was gone, moving through the corridor like a shadow with purpose. The palace guards were in chaos. Shouts echoed, armor clattered, and through the confusion came reports. Intruders in the lower halls, unidentified, heavily armed. Someone had slipped past the outer defenses. An impossible feat unless helped from within. Ethan moved swiftly through the smoke and noise, his mind cutting through panic like a blade through fog. He had no weapon, but his body remembered the rhythm of battle, the smell of metal, the heat of fear. It all came rushing back. He reached the control chamber and found 3 guards dead, throats slit cleanly. Blood darkened the silver floor. He crouched beside one, checking the wound. Professional, silent, fast. Whoever did this wasn't here to steal. They were here to kill. He looked up at the security feed. The attackers were already moving toward the upper levels, toward Lyra's chamber. Ethan's jaw tightened. He ran. Lyra, meanwhile, had refused to stay in her room. She moved quickly through the golden corridor, 2 of her personal guards at her side. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her composure. She was an empress. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Your Majesty, please," one guard begged. "We must get you to the vault." "No," she said firmly. "My people are dying. I will not hide while they bleed for me." But even as she spoke, a dark figure dropped from the ceiling above them. A blade flashed, and one of her guards fell without a sound. Lyra gasped, stumbling back. The second guard swung his weapon, but the intruder moved too fast. A single strike, and both guards were gone. The assassin turned toward her, a tall being wrapped in black armor, his face hidden behind a silver mask. "The throne must fall," he hissed. Lyra's back hit the wall. Her heart pounded, and she looked for anything at all, and to defend herself. But before the assassin could move again, a blur struck from the shadows. Ethan. He slammed into the attacker with a force that shook the wall. The assassin's blade flew from his hand, clattering across the floor. Ethan's fist connected with the man's jaw once, twice, each hit faster, harder, colder. The air filled with the sound of bone and breath. Lyra could hardly believe her eyes. The man who never spoke above a whisper now moved with terrifying precision. His body seemed to remember every kill, every motion of war. The assassin tried to strike back, but Ethan caught his arm and twisted. A sharp crack followed. Then, without hesitation, Ethan drove the broken limb into the attacker's own chest. The man dropped, gasping, and went still. Lyra stared, speechless. Ethan turned to her, breathing hard. His eyes, once calm, now burned like fire behind smoke. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head. "No." "But you—" He didn't let her finish. He picked up the assassin's weapon, checking its design. "They're professionals," he said quietly. "Too skilled for bandits. Someone sent them." Lyra's voice trembled. "Who would dare attack me in my own palace?" Ethan looked up, his jaw tight. "Not just you? They came for me too." Her heart sank. She understood then. The rebellion wasn't just against her rule. It was against their union, against the symbol of human and alien standing as one. The guards arrived moments later, but by then Ethan had already swept the halls clean of danger. His silence returned, but something had changed. Lyra saw it in his eyes. A storm she had never seen before, one he could barely contain. That night, after the halls were secured and the wounded tended to, Lyra found him in the royal courtyard. He was sitting beneath the tall silver trees, staring at the weapon he had taken. She approached quietly. "You saved me," she said softly. He didn't look up. "I failed to stop them from entering. I should have seen it coming. You can't blame yourself for everything." He gave a bitter smile. "Soldiers do. It's what we're trained for." Lyra knelt beside him, touching his arm. "You're not a soldier anymore, Ethan." He looked at her then, eyes shadowed by something old and deep. "That's what I keep telling myself," he whispered. "But tonight I felt it again, that pull, that darkness. The part of me that doesn't stop once it starts." She held his hand gently. "You stopped tonight. You chose love over anger." He didn't reply, but the look in his eyes said he wasn't sure. As the night wind passed through the silver leaves, Lyra rested her head against his shoulder. For a moment the world was still. But far beyond the palace, hidden among the stars, a fleet began to move, carrying the mark of the old noble houses who had sworn to destroy the Empress and her human protector. The storm Ethan had sensed was coming, and soon his silence would no longer be enough to stop it. The next few days after the attack were tense and sleepless. The palace guards doubled their patrols. Security drones hovered in the corridors, and every noble who had once smiled at the Empress now bowed with trembling respect. Yet despite the calm faces and polite words, Lyra could feel fear moving beneath the surface like a quiet river of poison. Something terrible was coming, and everyone knew it. Ethan sensed it too. He never spoke of it, but Lyra could see the signs. He spent long hours walking the empty halls at night, inspecting walls, doors, and shadows. He checked every guard post, memorized the patterns of the sentinels, and sometimes stood for hours on the balcony just staring at the city below. His silence, once peaceful, now carried the weight of a man waiting for war. Lyra tried to reach him, but his distance grew. When she touched his hand, he smiled faintly, but his eyes were elsewhere. She felt as though he was already fighting a battle in his mind, one she could not see. "Ethan," she said one evening as they sat in her private chambers, "since that night you have not been the same." He looked up slowly. "Neither have you," she frowned softly. "I'm trying to protect our peace," he nodded. "And I'm trying to protect you." "But you're slipping away from me," she whispered. "I feel it." He said nothing for a while, then stood and walked toward the large window overlooking the capital. The light of the setting suns painted his face in gold and red. "I made a promise," he said quietly. "I swore never to draw my blade again." "But if what I fear comes true, I might have to break that promise." Lyra rose and went to him. "Then let me fight beside you." He turned to her, his eyes filled with both love and sorrow. "You are my heart, Lyra. I can't let my heart walk into battle." Her voice trembled. "And I can't watch you destroy yourself." He didn't answer, only turned back to the horizon where dark shapes moved among the clouds. Ships, too many to be coincidence. That night the storm broke. It began during the royal feast, a celebration meant to calm the empire after the assassination attempt. Nobles filled the grand hall, their laughter fake and thin. Musicians played softly, their notes floating through the air like fragile glass. Lyra sat at the head of the long crystal table, her hand resting near Ethan's. He wasn't eating. His eyes kept moving, scanning every corner, every movement. The instincts of a soldier never truly slept. And then, the lights flickered. For a moment, the music wavered, the chandeliers dimmed, and a cold wind rushed through the hall. Every noble froze, glancing around in confusion. Then the power cut completely. Darkness fell. "Guards!" Lyra shouted, screams echoed. Then came the sound of metal, swords drawn, armor clashing, bodies falling. Red emergency lights blinked to life, painting the room in blood-colored glow. Figures dropped from the high arches above, assassins in black armor, their faces masked. Blasters hissed, energy bolts cracked through the air. Ethan moved instantly. In one motion, he pushed Lyra down behind the throne and took a step forward. The sound of the old promise echoed in his mind. "I'll never draw my blade again." But then he saw the first assassin raise his weapon toward her, and something inside him snapped. Without a word, he reached beneath his coat and pulled free a dark, sheathed weapon, one that hadn't seen the light of day for years. Its handle was wrapped in old leather, worn smooth from war. It was his sword, forged on earth during its final wars, black as night, made not of pride but of desperation. He drew it. The moment the blade left its sheath, the hall fell silent. Even the assassins seemed to hesitate. The steel gleamed under the red light, carrying a strange aura of dread. It was not elegant or royal. It was raw, human, and alive. Then Ethan moved. He became a blur of motion, a storm of precision and fury. His blade cut through the air like lightning, striking faster than the eye could follow. One assassin lunged. He sidestepped and sliced through the armor with a single clean motion. Another fired a shot. Ethan spun, his sword deflecting the bolt, and the next strike took the shooter's throat. The nobles screamed and ducked under tables as chaos exploded around them. Lyra rose, her eyes wide, unable to look away. The man she had known, quiet, gentle, endlessly patient, was gone. In his place stood a warrior of old earth, a creature forged in war and grief. His movements were deadly but controlled, each strike measured, each kill efficient. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion. Only purpose, protect the Empress. The guards shouted as they joined the fight, but Ethan was already ahead of them. He fought not like a man defending a throne, but like a man protecting the only person that gave him peace. When one assassin tried to reach Lyra, Ethan's eyes turned cold. He crossed the distance in 3 steps and drove his sword straight through the attacker's chest. The man gasped, clutching the blade, but Ethan didn't stop. He twisted it, pulled it free, and let the body drop. For a heartbeat, the hall went still. The remaining assassin stepped back, uncertain. Ethan stood in the center, the blade dripping with red, his breath steady but heavy. Lyra whispered his name, her voice trembling. "Ethan!" He looked back at her. His eyes glowed under the crimson light, not with rage, but with something older. Pain, memory, love. Then more enemies poured in from the side doors. Ethan turned toward them, his shoulders tightening. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice carried through the hall. Calm and commanding, and for the first time, Lyra heard the soldier in him, not the man she had married, but the warrior Earth had made. He fought until the hall was silent again. When the last assassin fell, the only sounds left were the crackle of burning fabric and the faint hum of damaged lights. The marble floor was painted red. Ethan stood among the fallen, his blade still in hand. Lyra slowly walked toward him, her eyes filled with tears, and not of fear, but of heartbreak. "You swore you'd never draw it again," she whispered. He looked at her, his expression softening, his voice low and heavy. "I also swore I'd never lose you." The sword slipped from his hand, clattering against the floor. The sound echoed like thunder in the quiet hall. He sank to one knee, staring at his hands, shaking, covered in blood. Lyra knelt beside him and took those trembling hands in hers. "You saved me," she said gently. He shook his head. "I broke my promise." She touched his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You didn't break it. You kept another one, the one that matters more." For the first time since the attack began, Ethan's expression softened. His eyes closed and a single tear slipped down his cheek. Outside, the palace bells rang, calling for aid, for victory, for warning. No one knew. But inside the shattered hall, the Empress held her silent human, surrounded by the wreckage of death and devotion. And above them, the stars shone cold and distant, witnesses to the night when a human silence ended, and his blade spoke for love. The morning after the massacre, silence ruled the palace. The scent of burnt metal still lingered in the air, and the great hall remained sealed off with guards standing at every door. Blood had been cleaned from the floors, but its shadow still haunted every tile. Lyra hadn't slept. She sat beside Ethan in their chamber, watching the man who had saved her life, and destroyed a part of himself in doing so. He was quiet as ever, but now his silence felt heavier, sharper. His hands were bandaged, and the once bright eyes that had looked at her with such warmth now seemed distant, like they were seeing ghosts. He hadn't spoken since the night of the attack. Not one word. When the healers came, he refused their help. When the generals came to praise him, he turned his back. Even when Lyra tried to speak to him, he simply nodded as though words had lost all meaning to him. But Lyra knew. He was breaking inside. She sat close to him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "You saved us all," she whispered. Ethan looked at her, and for a heartbeat she saw the flicker of emotion in his eyes. Sorrow, regret, and something deeper. "Did I?" he said softly. "Or did I only remind them what humans are capable of?" His voice, when it came, was quiet but cold. It was not the voice of a monster, but of a man who had seen too much. Lyra's heart ached. They needed to see. They needed to know what loyalty means. He gave a small, bitter smile. "They saw more than loyalty, Lyra. They saw fear." She frowned. "Fear?" Ethan turned toward the window, looking out at the empire below. "Your people fear power they don't control, and I showed them something they can't control. Me." His words struck her like ice. She wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong. But even she had seen the way the nobles looked at him after the battle, not with gratitude but with unease. The quiet human who had lived peacefully at her side had turned into something terrifying that night. Before she could answer, the door opened. General Kirill entered, tall, scaled, his armor gleaming under the pale morning light. He bowed to Lyra, then looked at Ethan with wary eyes. "Empress," Kirill said formally, The council demands to see your husband. Lyra stood. For what purpose? They want to question him about the attack, Kirill said carefully. There are rumors. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. Rumors? Kirill shifted uncomfortably. Some claim the assassins were from the outer colonies. Others believe they were mercenaries. But there are whispers that a human weapon was awakened inside the palace. Some even say you— Enough, Lyra interrupted, her tone sharp. He saved my life. He is not on trial. Kirill bowed again, but his gaze didn't leave Ethan. With respect, Empress, the council fears what they do not understand, and right now they fear him. Ethan stood slowly, his height and calm presence filling the room like quiet thunder. Let them fear, he said. Fear keeps fools from doing something stupid. Kirill's expression hardened, but he said nothing more. He turned and left. Lyra turned to Ethan the moment the door closed. Please don't speak to them that way. They're already looking for a reason to turn against you. He looked at her. I don't care about them. I care about you, her voice broke. And if they try to take you from me, then I'll burn their halls before I let them. His words weren't loud, but they carried a weight that made Lyra's heart tremble. There was no arrogance in his voice, only certainty. Later that day, the council met in the high chamber. Lyra stood before them, dressed in her imperial gown, every inch the ruler of her people. Ethan stood beside her, silent, his sword absent but his presence unmistakable. The councilors whispered among themselves, their jeweled robes glittering, their eyes sharp with judgment. One of them, Lord Valen, a tall, silver-skinned alien with narrow eyes, and stepped forward. Empress, he began coldly, we owe the human gratitude for your survival. But we must also ask, what kind of creature slaughters trained assassins like animals? Lyra's jaw tightened. A protector, Valen sneered. A weapon, one that could be turned against us. You say he's loyal, but what if he decides you are not worth protecting? The hall erupted in murmurs. Ethan remained still. He didn't look at them. He didn't defend himself. Finally, Valen pointed a long finger toward him. Human, do you deny that you killed 24 men in less than a minute? Ethan's voice was calm. No. The counselors exchanged glances. And do you deny, Valen continued, that you fought with skills far beyond the training of any imperial soldier? Skills meant for mass war? Ethan's eyes met his. I don't deny it. Then how can we know you are not a danger to the Empress herself? At that, Ethan finally smiled. Not with joy, but with something that made every alien in the chamber go quiet. Because if I were, he said softly, you wouldn't be standing here to ask. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lyra could feel every heartbeat in the room. Valen's face paled slightly, his mouth opening but no words coming out. Ethan stepped forward, slow, deliberate. I've seen what war does. I've buried friends, burned cities, and watched entire worlds fall because people like you wanted control. I came here for peace. I married her because she gave me something worth living for. He turned his gaze to Lyra and his voice softened. I will never raise my blade for conquest again. But if you threaten her, if any of you try to harm her, I will show you what humanity looks like when it stops holding back. The chamber froze. Even the guards shifted nervously. Lyra's eyes were wet as she stepped closer to him. Ethan, she whispered. Valen finally found his voice trembling. Is that a threat? Ethan looked at him, unblinking. It's a promise. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Lyra raised her voice, calm but commanding. This session is over. She took Ethan's hand and led him out, her head held high. The counselors watched in silence, too afraid to stop them. When they reached the quiet hallway, Lyra finally let her facade break. She turned to Ethan, her voice shaking. You shouldn't have said that. You've made them hate you. He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear. Let them hate me. I don't need their love. I only need you safe, her heart twisted. You'll never be free here, Ethan. They'll always see you as a monster. He smiled faintly, the sadness in his eyes softening. Then I'll be your monster. She couldn't stop the tears this time. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him tight, her voice breaking against his chest. You're not a monster. You're my human. And for the first time in many days, Ethan closed his eyes and let himself breathe again. Outside, the Empire trembled, not because of rebellion or invasion, but because a single silent human had spoken. and his words would echo across the stars, reminding them all why humans were both feared and loved. The days that followed were heavy with silence. The palace, once full of song and laughter, had turned into a cage of whispers and watching eyes. Servants bowed lower than before, guards saluted stiffly, and the nobles, those who had once praised the human as the Empress's brave protector, now looked at him with hidden fear. Lyra could feel it all. Every room she entered went quiet when Ethan was near. Every council meeting carried questions that were not spoken aloud. How long until the human turns on us? How long until he decides we are the enemy too? She hated it. She hated that they couldn't see what she saw. The kindness beneath his scars. The silence that came not from pride but from pain. Ethan noticed too, but he never complained. He only kept his distance from the nobles, spending his days training alone in the outer courtyards or standing at the edge of the balcony at night, watching the twin moons drift across the sky. Lyra would sometimes wake in the middle of the night and find him sitting in the dark, sword unsheathed beside him, his eyes far away as if seeing another world, Earth perhaps, the place he never spoke of. One night she walked quietly up behind him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. "You're not alone," she whispered. He didn't move. "I know," he said softly, "but it feels like I am." "Because they fear you?" He shook his head. "Because I fear myself." Lyra's heart broke at those words. She turned him to face her, her hand resting against his chest. "You're not the monster they think you are." His eyes softened. "Maybe not to you, but to them, I'm the reminder that peace is fragile." Before she could answer, a sharp knock came at the door. A young messenger entered, out of breath. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing quickly to Lyra. "The northern fleets, there's been an attack." Lyra's heart skipped. "Who?" "Unknown ships, unidentified weapons. They've crossed the border worlds and destroyed 3 colonies already. The council demands your presence immediately." Ethan rose instantly. "I'm coming with you." The messenger hesitated, his eyes flickering nervously toward Ethan. Lyra saw it and her anger flared. "He goes wherever I go," she said firmly. Minutes later they entered the war chamber. Holographic maps flickered above the table, red lights marking destroyed worlds spreading like a sickness across the stars. The counselors were shouting. Voices clashed like swords. They came out of nowhere. "We must retaliate. We should contact the humans. Perhaps this is their doing." At that, Lyra slammed her hand on the table. "Enough!" The room went silent. Her voice trembled with command. "You think this is Ethan's people? Look around you. His own world burned centuries ago, defending itself from monsters not unlike these." Valen, the same counselor who had challenged Ethan before, leaned forward. "With respect, Empress, how do we know he didn't signal them? Perhaps these invaders are his kind." Lyra's eyes flashed. "He's my husband." Valen's cold voice cut through the room. "And you may have doomed us by trusting him." The air grew tense. Guards shifted uneasily. Ethan stood silent, eyes locked on the holographic display. His jaw tightened. "Zoom in," he said. The tech officer hesitated, then expanded the image. The invading ships appeared. Dark, triangular vessels with strange glowing patterns across their hulls. Ethan's face hardened. "I've seen those before," he said quietly. Lyra turned to him. "Where?" "On the edges of Earth's last wars," he answered. "They weren't human. They were scavengers, creatures that fed on chaos. They never fought for honor or empire. They fought for sport." Valen narrowed his eyes. "And you expect us to believe that?" Ethan didn't look at him. "Believe what you want. But if they've returned, they won't stop at a few colonies. They'll come for the throne next." The room fell into a nervous silence. Lyra spoke firmly. "Prepare the defenses. Recall the fleets. And send a warning to every border world. The Empire stands together." Valen smirked bitterly. "With a human leading your defense?" Before Lyra could respond, Ethan stepped forward, his calm voice cutting through the noise. "You don't have to trust me, but you'll need me." His words silenced even the most arrogant of the counselors. That night, the Empress and her humans stood on the balcony overlooking the city. Below, lights shone across the capital like stars fallen to the ground, and in the distance, ships lifted off. War had begun. Lyra leaned against him, her voice trembling. "If they're as dangerous as you say, will we survive?" He looked up at the dark sky where faint glows marked the movement of distant fleets. "I don't know," he said quietly. "But I'll fight until we do." She turned to him, her eyes wet. "You've already given so much, Ethan, you shouldn't have to fight again." He smiled sadly. "Peace doesn't last on its own. It needs people willing to bleed for it." He brushed a hand against her cheek and she held it there. "You shouldn't have to be the one who bleeds." "Then who will?" he whispered. "They fear me, Lyra, but they'll need that fear now. Because when monsters come, sometimes you need one of your own to fight them." She looked at him, her heart both proud and broken. "You are not a monster." He kissed her forehead. "Maybe not. But I'm not the same man you married either." Lyra's hands trembled as she gripped his cloak. "Then promise me something. Anything. If this war comes here, if they reach the palace, don't face them alone." He paused, then smiled faintly. That soft, human kind of smile she loved so much. "You know I can't promise that." Tears filled her eyes. "Ethan." He lifted her chin gently. "Lyra, I'm not fighting for your empire. I'm fighting for you." And in that moment she understood his silence, his sorrow, his strength. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a man carrying the ghosts of his past, ready to stand against the darkness once more, because love had given him something worth breaking for. Later, as the night deepened, a single alarm echoed through the city, sharp, urgent, endless. Lyra ran to the window, her heart racing. Across the horizon, fire bloomed in the skies. The invasion had begun. Ethan's expression hardened. The soft warmth vanished, replaced by a soldier's resolve. He reached for the sword lying against the wall, the same blade he had promised never to draw again. Lyra caught his hand, her voice breaking. "Don't go!" He looked at her, his eyes gentle even as the world outside burned. "I have to. Please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Stay with me." He leaned forward and kissed her, deep, desperate, final. When he pulled away, his voice was calm. "I'll always stay with you, even if I don't come back." Before she could stop him, he turned and walked out, the blade resting across his back, the sound of his boots echoing down the marble hall. Lyra stood frozen at the window, watching fire fall from the heavens, knowing that the silent human she loved was walking once again into the storm. And this time, he wasn't fighting for survival, he was fighting for love. The sky above the imperial capital burned red. The invaders had arrived, dark ships like enormous scars cutting through the night. Energy beams tore through the clouds, striking the defense towers one by one. The sound of explosions rolled across the city like the roar of angry gods. Inside the palace, alarms screamed, soldiers ran through the marble halls, and the air was thick with fear. The war had come home. Ethan stood on the outer balcony of the highest tower, his eyes locked on the enemy fleet. His armor was scratched and old, not the shining kind the Imperial Guards wore, but his stance was unshakable. His sword hung at his side, humming softly with its strange metallic pulse. It was more than a weapon now. It was the last memory of Earth. Behind him, Lyra appeared, her royal gown replaced with a light combat cloak. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "You shouldn't be up here alone." He turned, offering her the faintest smile. "You said that before." She walked closer, the heat of distant fires reflecting in her eyes. "And you didn't listen then either." He reached out, brushing her cheek gently. "Because I can't watch you die." "Not you." Tears welled in her eyes. "Then let me fight beside you." He shook his head. "If you fall, this empire falls with you. You are its heart." "And what are you?" she whispered. He looked back at the burning sky. "The hand that holds the sword." Before she could speak again, a massive explosion shook the tower. The palace shields flickered. Ethan grabbed her, pulling her close as debris rained down. When the dust cleared, the guards outside shouted warnings. The enemy had breached the outer gates. "They're here," Ethan said quietly. Lyra's heart pounded. "Then we stand together." But he stepped back, his voice calm and low. "No, you lead the evacuation. Take your counsel, the civilians, everyone you can. I'll hold them off." "No!" Her voice cracked, desperate. "You'll die." He smiled softly. "Maybe, but if I don't, everyone else will." She grabbed his hand, refusing to let go. "You promised me you'd stay." He looked into her eyes, and for a long moment the world seemed to stop. "I did," he whispered. "And I am staying here where it matters." The sound of blaster fire grew closer. The guards shouted for retreat. Ethan gently pried her fingers from his hand. Go, Lyra, don't make me choose between you and them. Her tears fell freely now. Ethan, please. He silenced her with one last kiss, slow and full of everything he couldn't say. Live, he whispered. That's how you honor me. Then he turned and ran toward the palace gates, his cloak whipping behind him like a shadow. Lyra stood frozen, her heart screaming even as her body obeyed his final command. She ran toward the evacuation tunnels, each step tearing her soul apart. Outside, the battle had begun. The invaders poured through the broken gates and, towering, insect-like creatures in dark armor, their weapons glowing with violet energy. They spoke in shrill alien tongues, laughing as they killed, and then Ethan appeared. He walked alone through the smoke, the firelight painting his face in gold and crimson. The aliens paused, confused. One man, no army, no shield. Just a sword. Ethan stopped at the steps of the palace, unsheathing the blade. The metal sang, sharp and cold, and for a moment even the aliens seemed to hesitate. He whispered something to himself, maybe a prayer, maybe a memory, and then he moved. The first wave came fast, but Ethan was faster. His blade flashed, cutting through armor and bone like wind through paper. Energy bolts hissed toward him, but he twisted and deflected them, every motion clean and perfect. He fought like a ghost moving between shadows, his eyes bright with fury and love. Each time he struck, he remembered Lyra's face. Each time he fell, he remembered why he stood again. Hours passed like minutes. The battlefield became a storm of light and steel. Bodies fell around him, and still he fought, silent, relentless, unstoppable. But no man can fight forever. Eventually, his movement slowed. His armor cracked, blood seeping through the joints. The aliens surrounded him, their numbers endless. He fell to one knee, his breathing ragged, his vision blurring. Still he smiled. Come on then, he muttered. Let's finish it. They rushed him, and he raised his sword one last time. Above the palace, the sky lit up, a burning ship crashing into the enemy fleet. Ethan's last strike cut through the lead invader, and then everything went white. When Lyra returned hours later, the palace was half in ruins. Smoke and ash filled the air. She walked through the broken halls in silence, her eyes scanning every shadow, every fallen soldier. And then she saw him. Ethan lay at the base of the grand staircase, his armor shattered, his sword still clutched in his hand. Around him were dozens of dead enemies, a final circle of defiance. He had held the line. He had kept his promise. Lyra fell to her knees beside him, her tears falling on his blood-stained face. She lifted his head into her lap, her voice breaking. You did it. You saved us. His eyes fluttered open slightly. You came back, he whispered, she sobbed. I couldn't leave you. He tried to smile. Stubborn as always. She took his hand and pressed it against her heart. Don't talk. Stay with me. I'm right here, he said softly. His voice was fading. Always. Her tears fell harder. I love you. His eyes met hers, full of peace, warmth, and a hint of that quiet humor she loved. I know, his hand grew still. The light in his eyes dimmed. Lyra screamed his name, holding him tightly as the world outside finally fell silent. Later, when the smoke cleared, the surviving soldiers found her sitting beside him, her gown torn, her face streaked with tears, but her crown still shining in the dim light. She stood slowly and looked down at his sword. It was old, broken, but still glowing faintly, like a heart refusing to die. She picked it up, holding it high for all to see. He gave his life for this empire, she said, her voice steady, though her soul was breaking. Remember him not as a weapon, but as a man who loved. That day, across the empire, the legend of the silent human spread. They said he was the man who fought alone when all others fled. They said he was the warrior who feared nothing but losing the woman he loved, and they said his spirit still watched over the Empress, guarding her in every shadow. Years later, Lyra often stood on that same balcony where they once watched the stars. She ruled wisely and kindly, always remembering the human who changed her life. Every night, she would look to the heavens, whispering softly to the wind, You kept your promise, Ethan, you stayed. And somewhere beyond the stars, where war and pain could never reach, a silent human smiled, his blade finally at rest.